Cowboy versus tribal princess. One wound sparked a war, but one truth changed everything. In a wide and endless land where the sky stretched like a blue blanket and the wind carried the smell of dust and wild grass, two very different worlds existed side by side. Most people who lived there never noticed how close these worlds were, because they were separated not just by land but by culture, belief, and way of life. Still, destiny had its own plans, quietly weaving their stories together long before they ever met. On the western side of this land lay a vast dry plain filled with rolling hills, golden fields, and scattered ranches. This was the home of cowboys, people who lived by hard work, patience, and respect for nature. Among them was a young cowboy named Armand. He was known in his town as a calm and steady man, someone who spoke less but acted with kindness. He wore a simple hat, dusty boots, and a worn leather jacket that had seen many seasons. His hands were rough from years of riding horses, repairing fences, and helping his father run their small ranch. Armand did not come from a rich family. His ranch was modest, with a few cattle, 2 strong horses, and a small wooden house that creaked in the wind at night. Still, he never complained. He loved the wide-open land, the sound of hooves on dry ground, and the warm feeling of the sun on his face at dawn. Every morning, before the first light of day, he would wake up, feed the animals, and ride across the fields to check if everything was safe. People in his town respected him because he was honest and never tried to cheat anyone. If a neighbor lost a cow, Armand would be the first to search for it. If a storm damaged a fence, he would quietly help fix it, without expecting anything in return. Some saw him as a simple cowboy, but those who knew him well understood that he had a gentle heart and deep sense of responsibility. Beyond the plains, further to the east, rose tall green mountains covered with thick forests and hidden valleys. This was a completely different world. Here lived a proud and ancient tribe that had been in these lands for generations. They lived close to nature, respected every tree, river, and animal, and believed that all living things were connected by spirit and destiny. At the center of this tribe stood their tribal princess Zara. She was not just royalty by birth, but also by character. Unlike many leaders who ruled with fear, Zara ruled with wisdom and compassion. She had long, dark hair that flowed like a river over her shoulders, and eyes that seemed to hold both strength and kindness. Her clothing was colorful, decorated with traditional patterns that told stories of her ancestors. Zara had grown up listening to the elders' tales about harmony with nature and the importance of protecting their land. From a young age, she had learned how to speak with calmness, make fair decisions, and care for her people. The tribe did not see her as just a princess. They saw her as their protector, their hope, and their guide. Every morning, Zara would walk through the village, greeting the children, helping the women, and speaking with the elders. She knew each person by name and understood their struggles. When there was a problem, they came to her, trusting that she would listen and find a peaceful solution. Despite their differences, both Armand and Zara shared one important thing: deep love for their land. Armand loved the wide plains where he could ride freely, while Zara cherished the mountains and forests that sheltered her people. Yet, because of their different ways of life, neither side truly understood the other. Between the cowboy land and the tribal mountains lay a narrow stretch of wild territory, filled with tall grass, rocky paths, and scattered streams. Few people traveled there, as it was considered a border between two worlds. The cowboys believed the tribal land was dangerous and mysterious, while the tribe believed the cowboys were reckless and careless with nature. Over time, stories and misunderstandings grew on both sides. Some cowboys claimed that the tribe was hostile and unpredictable. Some tribal members whispered that cowboys only cared about themselves and their animals, not about the balance of nature. Because of this, both sides kept their distance, living parallel lives without ever truly knowing each other. One quiet evening, as the sun slowly dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, Armand was finishing his daily work. He had spent the day riding across the fields, making sure no cattle had wandered too far. His horse, a strong brown stallion named Dustwind, trotted beside him calmly. As he prepared to head back home, he noticed something unusual. One of his younger horses, still wild and nervous, had broken free from its rope and was running toward the distant hills. Without hesitation, Armand mounted Dustwind and rode after it, determined not to lose the animal. Meanwhile, high in the mountains, Zara was walking near the edge of her village. She had spent the day speaking with elders and helping settle a small disagreement between two families. Feeling tired but peaceful, she decided to take a short walk alone to clear her mind. She moved gracefully along a narrow path surrounded by tall trees and soft grass. The air was cool and birds sang gently in the distance. As she reached a small open clearing, she paused to look at the setting sun, unaware that events far beyond her control were already in motion. Back on the plains, Armin chased the runaway horse further than he had ever gone before. The ground slowly changed from flat fields to uneven rocky terrain. He knew he was nearing the borderland that separated his world from the tribe's territory, but in his focus he did not stop. His heart pounded as he pushed Dustwind faster, determined to catch the frightened animal before it disappeared into the wild. He did not realize how close he was getting to a place where he did not belong. At the same time, Zara heard a faint sound in the distance, the rhythm of galloping hooves. She turned, confused. It was rare for anyone to travel so close to the tribal land at that speed. For a brief moment she felt uneasy but remained calm, believing it was probably one of her own people returning from a hunt. As Armand crossed into the border area, the air felt different. The wind carried a new scent, a mix of pine trees and fresh water instead of dry dust.
He slowed down slightly, noticing that the land was no longer familiar to him.
Still, he kept going, focusing only on the runaway horse that was now dangerously close to disappearing into thick forest. He had no intention of entering tribal land, but fate did not always follow human plans. Far ahead, Zara began walking back toward her village, unaware that their two worlds were about to collide in a way neither of them could imagine. At that moment, the land seemed quiet, as if holding its breath. The sky darkened slowly and shadows stretched across the ground. Two lives, separated by tradition and distance, were moving closer without knowing it. Armin, driven by responsibility, rode forward with determination. Zara, guided by duty and peace, walked with quiet strength. Both were good people in their own ways, shaped by their surroundings and experiences. Yet, beneath the calm surface of this beautiful land, an unexpected twist of fate was waiting, one that would shake both their worlds, challenge their beliefs, and set in motion a chain of events that no one could stop. For now, all was peaceful. The cowboy rode beneath the fading light, and the tribal princess walked among her people's sacred land. Neither knew that their paths were about to cross, and that their lives would soon be tied together in a way that would change everything forever. The evening had turned quieter, but the stillness felt strange, as if the land itself was waiting for something to happen. The sky was slowly changing from bright orange to soft purple, and the first stars were beginning to appear. A gentle breeze moved through the tall grass, making soft whispering sounds that carried across the open fields and into the mountains. Armin rode steadily on his brown stallion, Dustwind, following the runaway horse that was now getting farther away. The young horse was fast, scared, and unpredictable. Its hooves kicked up clouds of dust as it ran across rocky ground and uneven paths. Armin kept his eyes locked on it, determined not to lose sight of his animal. He leaned forward slightly in his saddle, urging Dustwind to move faster, but still keeping control. As he rode deeper toward the hills, the land began to look unfamiliar. The dry plains slowly turned into patches of green grass, scattered bushes, and then tall trees. Armin realized that he had crossed into the borderland, but he convinced himself that he was still safe. He did not mean any harm, and he believed that no one would mind if he simply retrieved his horse and left. His heart beat quickly, not from fear but from concentration. He had spent his whole life working with animals, and he knew that if the young horse ran too far into the wild, it might get lost forever or injured in the rough terrain. That thought pushed him forward, making him ignore everything else around him. Meanwhile, in the tribal mountains, Zara had finished her quiet walk and was slowly making her way back toward her village. The path she followed was narrow, surrounded by tall trees that formed a natural arch above her head. Fireflies had started to glow faintly in the fading light, and the sounds of crickets filled the air. She walked calmly, her mind filled with thoughts about her people and their future. Recently, some of the younger members of the tribe had grown worried about outsiders moving closer to their land. Zara had been trying to reassure them that peace was always better than fear, but she knew that protecting her people was still her responsibility. As she reached a small clearing near the edge of the forest, she paused for a moment. The ground there was soft, covered with green grass and small wildflowers. A gentle stream flowed nearby, reflecting the colors of the sky like a mirror. Zara often came to this spot when she needed quiet time to think. She knelt down and dipped her fingers into the cool water, feeling its gentle flow. For a brief moment, everything felt peaceful and in balance. She closed her eyes and took a slow breath, listening to the sounds of nature around her. At that same time, Armin was getting closer to the runaway horse. The young animal had slowed down slightly, its legs growing tired from running. Armin saw his chance and gently guided Dustwind alongside it, trying to move close enough to grab the loose rope that still dangled from its neck. He spoke softly, using a calm voice the way he always did when dealing with nervous animals. He did not shout or threaten. Instead, he tried to soothe the horse, hoping it would trust him. Little by little, he managed to ride closer. But just as he reached out, something unexpected happened. A small rock slipped under Dustwind's hoof, causing the stallion to stumble. Armin quickly adjusted his balance, but in that sudden moment of movement his hand brushed against the rifle that hung loosely at his side. The rifle was not meant for harming people. Armin carried it mainly to protect his cattle from wild animals and to scare off predators. Still, in that instant of chaos, the rifle shifted, and a sudden loud sound echoed across the land. The noise was sharp and shocking, breaking the peaceful evening like thunder in a clear sky. Birds flew up from nearby trees, and even the wind seemed to pause. Armin's heart froze as he realized what had happened. Far away, Zara, who was still near the stream, heard the loud sound as well. She turned quickly, her body tensing. She had never heard such a noise so close to her village before. A wave of unease passed through her, but she remained composed as she had been taught since childhood. Before she could fully understand what was happening, she felt a sudden, painful impact on her side. She gasped softly, her body losing balance as she fell gently onto the grass. The water in the stream rippled, disturbed by the shock of the moment. The sound of the rifle had not been meant for her, but fate had placed her in the wrong place at the wrong time. Back on the borderland, Armin froze completely. He looked toward the direction where the sound had traveled and felt his stomach drop. He had not seen anyone, had not aimed at anyone, and had no intention of hurting a living person. Still, deep in his heart, he knew something terrible might have happened. His hands trembled slightly as he sat on Dustwind, torn between chasing the runaway horse and finding out what had just occurred. The young horse, frightened again by the loud noise, bolted further into the forest and disappeared from sight. For a moment, Armin sat there in silence, the weight of what might have happened pressing down on him. Then, driven by fear and responsibility, he turned Dustwind toward the direction of the sound and rode forward slowly. Meanwhile, in the tribal village, the noise had caused immediate panic. Several tribal members who were nearby rushed toward the clearing where Zara had been walking. Their faces were filled with shock and concern as they saw their princess lying on the ground. Two women quickly knelt beside her, gently lifting her upper body. Zara was still conscious, but she looked pale and in pain. She tried to speak, but her voice came out weak. The elders were called immediately and a group of warriors gathered, their expressions hard and angry. They believed without hesitation that this had been an attack by an outsider. To them, the loud sound could only mean one thing: a weapon fired by someone who did not belong on their land. One of the tribal warriors, tall and strong, clenched his fists in rage. He shouted that the cowboys had crossed the border and harmed their princess. His voice echoed through the village, spreading fear and anger like wildfire. Within minutes, the peaceful evening had turned into chaos. People ran back and forth, some rushing to help Zara, others preparing weapons to defend their land. The elders tried to calm them, but the sight of their injured princess filled everyone with deep emotion. Zara, despite her pain, could see the storm of anger building around her. She felt weak, but clear-minded. In her heart, she knew that rushing into violence would only bring more suffering, but at that moment, her people were too upset to listen. Back on the rocky path, Armin rode closer to the clearing. His chest felt tight, and his mind raced with worry. As he approached, he saw figures moving in the distance, tribal people gathering, their movements tense and sharp. He slowed Dustwind to a stop, unsure of what to do. He wanted to call out, to explain that it was an accident, but fear held his tongue. He knew that if he spoke now, they might not listen and could see him as a threat. From where he stood, he could just barely see Zara lying near the stream, surrounded by her people. His heart sank when he realized that someone had indeed been hurt. A deep sense of guilt washed over him, even though he knew he had not acted with bad intention. The tribal warriors noticed him at the edge of the clearing almost instantly. Several of them pointed in his direction, their faces filled with suspicion and anger. Some began moving toward him, their posture tense and ready for confrontation. Arman raised his hand slowly, showing that he meant no harm. He kept his voice calm, though his heart was pounding. He tried to explain that he had been chasing his horse and that the shot had been an accident, but his words were lost in the noise of the crowd and their rising fury. To the tribe, his presence there so close to their injured princess was proof enough of his guilt. They did not see a worried cowboy, they saw an outsider who had crossed their sacred land and caused harm. Zara, hearing the commotion, turned her head slightly and saw Arman standing at the edge of the clearing. Even in her pain, she noticed something different about him. His posture was not that of an attacker. Instead, he looked shaken, troubled, and afraid. Still, before she could say anything, her vision blurred, and she had to focus on breathing. The elders urged her to stay still while they prepared to take her back to the village for treatment. As night slowly fell, torches were lit around the clearing, casting flickering shadows on the ground. The tribe's anger continued to grow, and talk of retaliation spread quickly. Some warriors insisted that this was a deliberate act of aggression and that they must prepare to defend their people. Arman remained where he was, trapped between guilt, fear, and helplessness. He did not run, even though he knew he was in danger. Part of him felt that leaving would make him truly guilty, while staying meant facing the consequences of something he never intended. The peaceful land that had seemed so calm only moments before now felt heavy with tension. The sound of the stream, the rustling leaves, and the quiet night air were overshadowed by anger, pain, and misunderstanding. Two worlds, once separated by distance and tradition, had now collided in the most painful way possible. A single moment of chaos had sparked fear, blame, and the first steps toward conflict. As the stars filled the sky above, neither Arman nor Zara could fully understand what this night would lead to. But deep beneath the surface, something powerful had begun, a chain of events that would pull both of them and their people into a struggle far greater than they could imagine. For now, all they knew was that a wound had been made, not just on Zara's body, but between two worlds that had long lived apart. And as the darkness settled over the land, the question remained unanswered. Would this moment bring only war? Or could something else, something unexpected, still emerge from the pain? The night had fully settled over the land, covering both the cowboy plains and the tribal mountains in a deep blanket of darkness. The once peaceful air now felt heavy, thick with tension, fear, and anger. The wind, which had been gentle earlier, now carried uneasy whispers through the trees and across the open fields. In the tribal village, fire torches burned brightly, lighting up worried faces. People moved quickly, speaking in low but tense voices. Some were scared, some were angry, and some were confused. At the center of all this stood Zara, now lying on a soft bed inside a large wooden hut that served as the tribe's healing place. Two elder healers carefully treated her wound using traditional herbs, warm cloth, and gentle prayers. Their hands moved slowly but confidently as they had done many times before for injured warriors and hunters. Zara winced in pain now and then, but she remained strong, refusing to cry out or show weakness in front of her people. Outside, the mood was completely different. Tribal warriors stood in tight groups, their expressions hard and determined. Some held spears, others carried bows, and a few gripped shields carved with ancient symbols of protection. Their leader, a tall warrior named Caro, paced back and forth, his jaw clenched tightly. He believed that this was not just an accident, but a direct attack on their people and their princess. In his mind, the cowboys had crossed the sacred border and proven that they could not be trusted. He spoke passionately. urging the tribe to prepare for war so they would never be caught off guard again. Many younger warriors agreed with him. Their blood boiled at the thought of their beloved princess being harmed. To them, this was a clear sign that outsiders did not respect their land or their traditions. They wanted justice, and in their anger, justice looked like revenge. However, not everyone felt the same. Some elders and wiser members of the tribe remained cautious. They reminded the others that rushing into conflict could bring even more suffering. They urged patience, saying that they should first understand what truly happened before making any final decision. Inside the healing hut, Zara could hear the distant voices of her people arguing outside. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing slowly, trying to stay calm despite the pain in her side. She had always believed that anger only created more pain, but now she could feel how hard it was to control it when emotions ran high. She thought about the cowboy she had seen briefly near the stream. His face had not looked cruel or hateful. Instead, he had appeared shocked and frightened, almost as if he was more scared than anyone else. That image stayed in her mind, making her question everything her people were assuming. Meanwhile, far from the village, Arman sat alone near the rocky border, still on his horse. The tribal warriors had not attacked him yet, but they had made it clear that he was not welcome. They had shouted warnings and pointed their weapons, forcing him to stay at a distance. The night air felt cold against his skin, and his heart felt even colder with guilt. He kept replaying the moment over and over in his mind. The stumble, the sudden sound, the chaos that followed. He wished desperately that he could turn back time and prevent it all. Dustwind stood quietly beneath him, sensing his rider's distress. Armin gently stroked the horse's neck, trying to calm both himself and his loyal companion. He knew he could ride away and return to his ranch, but something inside him refused to let him leave. He felt responsible. Even if it was an accident, someone had been hurt because of him. Running away would only make things worse. Still, he had no clear way to explain himself to a tribe that was already filled with anger and suspicion. Back at his ranch, his father, an old but strong man named Malik, was growing worried. Armin had been gone far longer than usual, and the night was already deep. Malik stood outside their small wooden house, looking toward the distant hills, his face lined with concern. He knew that his son was careful and responsible, but he also knew how unpredictable the borderland could be. He lit a small lantern and paced back and forth, hoping that Armin would return safely before morning. In the tribal mountains, tension continued to rise. As the hours passed, more warriors gathered, ready to defend their land if needed. Some suggested sending scouts to watch the cowboy territory, while others wanted to strike first before the outsiders could cause more harm. Caro, the warrior leader, grew more determined with each passing moment. He stood before the gathered tribe and spoke with fire in his voice, reminding them of their ancestors who had fought to protect their land generations ago. His words stirred their emotions, making their fear turn into anger. Yet, even as he spoke, Zara's voice echoed softly from inside the healing hut, asking to see him. One of the elders went to Caro and told him that the princess wanted to speak before any decision was made. Reluctantly, Caro entered the hut. Inside, the air smelled of herbs and smoke from a small fire burning in a corner. Zara lay on the bed, her face pale but her eyes strong and clear. She looked at Caro and spoke in a calm but firm voice. She told him that acting in anger would only bring more pain to their people. She reminded him that she had seen the cowboy's face and did not believe he meant harm. She asked him to wait, to investigate, and to listen before raising weapons. Caro struggled with her words. As a warrior, his instinct was to protect through strength. But as a loyal member of the tribe, he respected Zara deeply. He lowered his head slightly, torn between his duty as a fighter and his respect for his princess. Outside, Armin watched the distant flicker of tribal torches from where he stood. He could see movement in the village and hear faint voices carried by the wind. He felt small and powerless against the unknown force of their anger. At one point, a young tribal scout named Lonnie quietly slipped away from the village. Unlike the others, she was curious rather than angry. She had seen Armin from a distance and noticed something different about him. Instead of rushing toward him with weapons, she moved carefully through the trees to observe him.
She watched as he sat still on his horse, his head lowered, his posture heavy with worry. She saw no sign of threat or arrogance. Instead, she saw a man who looked lost, guilty, and deeply troubled. Lani decided not to approach him yet. Instead, she returned silently to the village, carrying with her a small seed of doubt about what everyone believed. As the night grew darker, exhaustion slowly began to settle over both sides. In the tribal village, some people finally went to rest, though many remained awake, standing guard with tense expressions. The elders continued to debate quietly among themselves, trying to find a path that would keep their people safe without leading to unnecessary conflict. Inside the healing hut, Zara drifted in and out of light sleep. In her dreams, she saw images of burning torches, running horses, and the calm face of the cowboy standing by the stream. Even in her unconscious mind, she felt that this situation was more complicated than it seemed. Far away, Malik eventually decided that he could not wait any longer. As dawn approached, he prepared to ride toward the border in search of his son, his heart heavy with fear but filled with love. Arman, still standing near the border, felt the first cool touch of morning air on his face. The sky began to lighten slightly, turning from deep black to dark blue. He looked toward the mountains, wondering what the new day would bring. He knew that the situation had already gone too far to be solved easily. His presence there had shaken an entire tribe, and a single mistake had turned into a growing conflict. Still, deep in his heart, he held on to a small hope that somehow the truth could be understood. In the tribal village, the warriors prepared for another tense day. Some sharpened their weapons, others practiced defensive formations, and many watched the distant plains with suspicion. Zara, despite her pain, asked to be helped outside to see the sunrise. Two women gently supported her as she stepped into the cool morning air. She looked toward the direction where Airman stood, her expression thoughtful rather than angry. She knew that her next words and actions could shape the future of both her people and the cowboy land. If she chose anger, war would likely follow. If she chose patience, there was still a chance for peace. As the first rays of sunlight touched the mountains, painting them in golden light, the land stood on the edge of something powerful and uncertain. Two worlds, now connected by pain and misunderstanding, waited for the next move. Fear, anger, and hope existed side by side in the hearts of everyone involved. The wound on Zara's body was being treated, but the deeper wound between their people was still open and bleeding. And as the new day began, one question hung silently in the air. Would rising tension lead to destruction, or could someone still find a way to turn fear into understanding before it was too late? The morning light slowly spread across the land, touching both the cowboy plains and the tribal mountains with a soft golden glow. The air felt fresh, but beneath that calm surface, tension still rested heavily over everything. Birds began to sing again, but their song sounded careful, as if even they sensed that something serious was unfolding. In the tribal village, people were already awake and moving. Some prepared food, others checked their weapons, and many stood near the edge of the village, staring toward the distant plains. The mood was quieter than the night before, but no less serious. Everyone knew that something important was about to happen, though no one knew exactly what. Zara sat outside the healing hut, supported by two women from her tribe. Her face still looked pale, but her eyes were clear and focused. A soft cloth was wrapped around her side where the healers had treated her wound. The pain had eased slightly, but she still felt weak. She looked across the valley toward the borderland where the cowboy had been seen the night before. Her mind was filled with thoughts. She did not feel anger in her heart, only confusion and a strong sense that something did not add up. At the same time, Arman remained in almost the same spot where he had stayed all night. His horse, Dustwind, stood patiently beside him, occasionally shaking its head or stamping its hoof on the ground. Arman looked tired, his face drawn from lack of sleep and heavy worry. The young runaway horse had disappeared completely, but Arman no longer cared about it. His thoughts were entirely on the injured tribal princess and the danger that now surrounded him. He knew that many in the tribe believed he was an enemy, but still he refused to leave. From the forest, the young tribal scout Lani watched him again, just as she had done the night before.
She had spent hours thinking about what she had seen. Something about Armand did not match the image of a cruel attacker that others were painting in their minds.
Carefully, Lonnie moved closer, staying hidden behind trees and tall bushes. She studied his movements, his posture, and his expression. Instead of looking confident or aggressive, he looked deeply troubled, almost broken by guilt. After some time, Lonnie made a quiet decision.
Instead of watching from afar, she would speak to him, not as a warrior, but as someone seeking the truth.
She stepped out slowly from behind a large tree, her hands visible to show she meant no harm. Armand noticed her immediately. His body tensed, but when he saw that she carried no weapon, he relaxed slightly. He did not move toward her. Instead, he stayed where he was, speaking softly so as not to frighten her. He told her again that he had been chasing his horse and that the shot had been an accident. His voice trembled slightly, not from fear, but from regret.
Lonnie listened carefully. She did not interrupt him.
She watched his eyes as he spoke, searching for any sign of deception. What she saw instead was honesty, pain, and deep sadness. She asked him a few simple questions about who he was, where he came from, and why he had crossed the border. Armand answered truthfully, explaining his life on the ranch, his love for his animals, and how he had never meant to enter tribal land. As they spoke, something small but important began to change. Instead of seeing each other as enemies, they started to see each other as people, different but not hateful. Meanwhile, back in the tribal village, Caro and the other warriors were preparing for possible conflict. They had set up watch points along the edges of the village and sent scouts to observe the plains. Their faces were serious, and their movements were sharp and alert. However, the elders called another meeting to discuss what should be done. They reminded everyone that war would bring suffering to both sides, and that the tribe had always valued wisdom over rage.
Zara, though still weak, insisted on speaking to the gathered group.
With the help of her people, she stood before them, her voice steady despite her injury. She told them that she had seen the cowboy's face at the moment of the incident. She explained that he had not looked like someone who wanted to harm her. Instead, he had looked shocked and afraid, as if he had never meant for anything like this to happen. Some warriors scoffed at her words, saying that outsiders could easily pretend innocence, but others listened carefully, especially those who trusted Zara's judgment deeply. At that moment, Lonnie returned to the village, walking calmly through the crowd. All eyes turned toward her as she stepped forward and spoke. She described what she had seen and heard from Armand. She explained that he had not tried to escape, had not threatened her, and had spoken honestly about his mistake. She said that he had looked more like a man carrying heavy guilt than someone seeking conflict. Her words caused murmurs among the tribe. Some still refused to believe her, but others began to reconsider their anger. Zara seized this moment. She told her people that before any decision about war or revenge, they must first understand the full truth. She asked them to allow her to speak directly with Armand in a peaceful way. This suggestion shocked many. Caro immediately objected, saying it was too dangerous. He feared that Armand could harm her again or that this could be some kind of trick. But Zara remained firm. She reminded him that a true leader must sometimes take risks for the greater good of her people. She said that if there was even a small chance that this had been a mistake, then starting a war would be a terrible injustice. After a long, intense discussion, the elders agreed to her request, but only under strict conditions. A small group of trusted warriors would accompany her, and the meeting would take place in the open clearing near the stream where the incident had occurred. When Armand saw movement in the village and noticed a group of people approaching, his heart began to race. He tightened his grip on Dustwind's reins, unsure whether this meant peace or danger. As the group came closer, he saw Zara among them, walking slowly with support. His breath caught in his throat. Seeing her alive and standing, even weakly, filled him with both relief and deep sorrow. The warriors surrounded her protectively, their eyes locked on Armand. He raised his hands again to show that he carried no weapon and meant no harm. Zara stepped forward slightly and spoke first. Her voice was calm but strong. She told Armand that she wanted to understand what had truly happened. She did not accuse him, but she did not hide her pain either. Armand lowered his head respectfully and explained everything once more, slowly
and clearly. He described the runaway horse, Dustwind's stumble, and how the rifle had gone off accidentally. He apologized sincerely, not just for the injury, but for crossing into their land without permission. As he spoke, Zara studied him closely. She listened not only to his words, but to his tone, his expression, and his energy. She could sense that his regret was real. For the first time since the incident, the tension in the air began to soften, just a little. The warriors remained tense, but they did not move to attack. Some still looked angry, but others appeared uncertain, struggling between their instincts and the possibility that this was truly an accident. Zara then asked Armin a simple but important question. She asked him whether he respected their land and their people.
Armin did not hesitate. He spoke from his heart, saying that he respected all living things and that he had never wanted to cause harm.
He admitted that he had been careless by riding so close to their territory, and he promised to be more careful in the future. His honesty touched something deep inside Zara.
She could see that this was not a cruel man, but a hard-working cowboy who had made a terrible mistake. At the same time, Caro watched silently, his arms crossed.
He still did not fully trust Armand, but he could not deny that the situation no longer looked as simple as he had first believed.
Then, something unexpected happened.
One of the elders stepped forward and revealed a small but important detail. Earlier that morning, they had examined the direction of the shot and found that it had not been aimed directly at Zara. Instead, the angle suggested that it had come from an unstable position, supporting Armin's story of a stumble. This discovery spread quickly among the group.
Slowly, piece by piece, the truth began to form in their minds. Lonnie added that Armin had stayed all night, even when he could have easily escaped.
That fact made many pause and think. Zara closed her eyes for a moment, absorbing everything.
When she opened them again, her expression was no longer filled with doubt. She turned to her people and spoke with quiet strength.
She told them that the wound on her body had not been caused by hatred, but by a tragic accident. She reminded them that their ancestors had always valued understanding over blind anger.
Some warriors still struggled to accept this, but the mood had clearly shifted. The fire of rage that had burned so brightly the night before was now flickering uncertainly.
Zara then made a bold decision. Instead of calling for punishment or revenge, she chose a different path. She declared that this moment should not lead to war, but to learning and change. She asked Armand to promise that he and his people would respect the border and never cross into tribal land without permission. In return, she said that her tribe would not attack the cowboys or seek revenge. Armin immediately agreed, bowing his head in respect.
He thanked her for her mercy and promised to spread this message to his own people. As the sun rose higher in the sky, bathing the clearing in warm light, something powerful and unexpected took place. What had started as pain, anger, and fear slowly began to transform into understanding. The warriors lowered their weapons slightly. The elders nodded in approval. Even Caro, though still cautious, could not deny that Zara's decision showed true leadership. Zara felt a mixture of relief and exhaustion. Her wound still hurt, but her heart felt lighter. She had faced one of the greatest challenges of her life and chosen wisdom over violence. Armin, too, felt a heavy weight lift from his chest. He knew that the situation was not completely resolved, but at least the truth had come out, and war had not begun. As both sides stood there in the bright morning light, they realized that this single moment, painful and frightening as it had been, had also revealed something deeper. They had seen that fear and anger could blind people, but truth and patience could bring them back to the right path. The land around them seemed to breathe again, as if relieved that bloodshed had been avoided. Still, the story was not over. The wound on Zara's body would heal, but the relationship between the cowboys and the tribe would need time, effort, and trust to truly recover. For now, one important truth had changed everything. The spark of war had been extinguished before it could grow into a destructive fire. And as the wind gently moved through the trees and across the plains, both Armand and Zara silently understood that this moment would shape not only their lives but the future of their people as well. As Island and Jack stood together, their bond solidifying with every shared glance, the air between them thickened with both uncertainty and hope.
They had fought the battles of their lives to get here, but the hardest fight was yet to come, convincing their people to see reason, to embrace peace instead of war.
The drums of conflict had been pounding for too long, and now, in the face of truth and love, everything seemed like it could change, for better or worse. Aylin's heart was torn. She had been raised with the belief that her people's survival depended on their defiance against the settlers, on fighting for their land and their customs. She had been groomed to lead her tribe into battle, to preserve their way of life at all costs. And yet, here she was, standing beside Jack, the man who had once been her enemy, but who now seemed like the only person who truly understood the pain of war. Together they had seen the same suffering, the same losses. They were both products of violence, but they also had the potential to end it. Jack, on the other hand, was caught in his own storm of emotions. He had spent his life running from one fight to the next, convinced that survival was the only goal worth pursuing. He had never allowed himself to stop and consider what it meant to live in peace, to build something better than the destruction he was used to. Yet here, with Aylin, he saw the possibility of something entirely different. Their relationship, born of bloodshed and misunderstanding, had turned into something beautiful and fragile. The thought of losing it all, of returning to the violence that had shaped both their lives, was unbearable, but there was still the matter of convincing the leaders.
Aylin's father, the chief, was a man of tradition, a warrior who believed in the strength of his people. To him, compromise was a weakness, and peace was a distant dream that could not replace the blood of battle. The settlers, too, had their own leaders, their own sense of pride and righteousness. They would never accept peace if it meant giving up their claim to the land they had fought for. Together, Aylin and Jack knew they had to speak to both sides, not as enemies but as equals. They had to show their people that the past didn't have to dictate the future, that the cycles of violence and hatred could end, and that a new path could be forged. The day of the meeting arrived, and the air was thick with tension.
Aylin and Jack rode to the place where the two sides had agreed to meet. It was a neutral ground, a small clearing near the river, where neither tribe nor settler had ever claimed ownership.
It was a place where nature itself seemed to hold the power, a reminder that the earth had existed long before the people, and would continue long after them. Aylin couldn't help but feel a sense of reverence as she gazed at the river flowing calmly by.
It was a symbol of life, of continuity, and of the hope that everything, even the deepest wounds, could heal with time. When they arrived, they found the leaders already gathered, their faces hard and wary. The chief of Aylin's tribe stood tall, his posture unyielding. His eyes, however, softened when he saw her, but his expression remained guarded. The settler leaders, too, stood in their ranks, their faces tight with suspicion. Aylin and Jack dismounted, their hands held firmly at their sides. Neither of them spoke at first. The silence was heavy, like the stillness before a storm. Aylin glanced at Jack and he nodded slightly, his expression a mix of determination and uncertainty. He wasn't a leader by birth, but by experience. He had no title, no crown to offer, but he had truth, and that, he believed, was the only thing that could save them now. The chief was the first to speak, his voice gruff and filled with authority. "What is this?"
"Why have you come together, Aylin? Are you so willing to betray your people for a settler?"
His words stung, and Aylin could feel the weight of his accusation. But she stood tall, her heart steady.
"I am not betraying anyone, father,"
she said, her voice calm yet firm.
"I am trying to stop the war before it destroys us all."
Jack stepped forward, his voice equally steady.
"The war is built on lies, on misunderstandings," he said, looking directly at the chief. "We've both been fighting the wrong enemy. The real enemy is the hatred we carry in our hearts. We've been taught to hate each other, to see each other as nothing more than threats. But that's not who we are. That's not who we have to be."
The settler shifted uneasily at Jack's words, but the chief remained silent, his eyes narrowing as he considered them. He glanced at the other tribal leaders who waited for his signal. The tension in the air was thick, and Aylin could feel the pounding of her heart in her chest. Aylin continued.
"I know the pain, father. I know what it's like to lose everything. to see the ones you love fall to the violence that has defined our lives. But what I've learned is that we don't have to continue down this path. We can choose peace. We can rebuild what's been destroyed."
Jack's eyes flickered with hope, but also fear. He knew this wasn't going to be easy, but he also knew that the truth was their only hope.
A long silence followed, as the chief and the other leaders processed their words. Finally, the chief spoke again, his voice quieter now, tinged with uncertainty.
"And what would peace look like, Island? How can we trust them?" "How can we trust you?"
Island's gaze softened as she turned to Jack. He had been branded an enemy for so long, but here he was, standing beside her, willing to face the wrath of both sides. She knew then that their future, her people's future, was tied to this moment.
"Peace," she said, "is not a promise. It's a choice. It's a choice we make every day, in every action, in every word we speak."
The chief studied her for a long moment, then turned his gaze to Jack. There was a flicker of understanding in his eyes.
He knew that peace would not come easy. It would require sacrifices. It would require the courage to face the unknown. But perhaps, just perhaps, it was the only way forward.
The other leaders, both tribal and settler, seemed to soften, their expressions less rigid. It wasn't much, but it was a start.
The conversation shifted, from accusations to possibilities, from war to a fragile hope. By the time the sun dipped low in the sky, the two sides had agreed on a tentative truce, a promise to stop the fighting, to meet again and discuss the future.
It wasn't the end of the war, but it was the first step toward peace.
And for the first time in years, Island felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She and Jack weren't enemies anymore. They were something more, partners in a new beginning. As they rode away from the meeting, their hearts were lighter, but their journey was far from over. They knew that change would take time, that old wounds wouldn't heal overnight. But they also knew that together they could build something better.
And so, as the stars began to twinkle in the clear sky above, Island and Jack looked toward the future, not with fear, but with hope. A hope that together they could change the world they had been born into, one step at a time.